Hello, welcome to this next substance painting tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to revisit the mask editor. So I've done a mask editor one before, but this is going to be a more thorough look at it. Okay, so what we're going to do, first of all, set a scene up. So I'm going to go File and then Open Sample, and I'm just going to pick the preview sphere because it's got all its maps baked and it's ready to go, and we've all got it, so it's helpful. You can follow along. So first of all, I'm going to just delete this whole stack of things here to get us back to our normal kind of preview. Okay, so let's add a layer. There we go. We'll add a layer there, and we'll add a black mask to this layer, and to this layer we'll add a generator, and for the generator we will add the mask editor. There we go. Let's make this bigger so we can see what's going on. Okay, so the mask editor is basically a stack of images, and it's based upon the mesh maps. So if you slide to the bottom, you'll see the baked maps you've got. So we've got our world space, position gradient, thickness, curvature and ambient occlusion. We also have two texture slots which we can add optionally. And we also have our micro normal and micro height to work with. So it's a little bit confusing because this whole kind of arrangement here can get very confusing. But basically what we can do is layer these together and adjust the settings and then blend the layers. And the layer stack essentially works from the bottom up. So it starts at thickness, and you'll see that thickness has no blend mode because it's the very bottom. If I then open up the position, we should start seeing we have blend modes. So it starts at the bottom and it works its way up. So what do we got? So it starts with thickness, position gradient, world space, curvature, AO, and then the optional texture 1 and 2. And then right at the top we have some global controls where we can affect the whole thing. So each of our each of our effect maps, or our bake maps, say if we look at ambient occlusion, have a set of settings. AO is quite a simple one. We have invert, blending mode, blur, balance and contrast, and blur, balance and contrast appear in most of the sections, but each of them has their own controls. Okay, so that's a general explanation as to what's going on, and in terms of usage, if you start at the bottom of your layer map, of your layer stack, and work your way up, you'll be able to build your effect in a much more kind of controlled manner. So that's the general explanation, and in the next few sections what we'll do is we'll use the mask editor to build up a mask which we can apply. Okay, so I will talk to you in the next section. Okay, so before you start, it's helpful to have a think about what you're doing, what you want to do. So I'm going to do a simple example now where I want to change the edges of a material so that I can wear them, or do something with them, or change roughness, or metallic or something. But I also want to break it up a little bit. So for that, what I'm going to need is the curvature map and a texture map. So since the curvature map is much lower in the tree or the stack than the texture, I'm going to want to go to the curvature layer, or the curvature options, and when I go to the blend mode, I want that to be normal because that's the bottom of my stack. I want to start from here, so normal is what I want. Okay. So another thing which is helpful is if you switch over to your mask view, you'll see what your mask currently looks like. So since curvature comes in default at a half, if it wasn't there it would be 0 there, and if it was at max it would be at 1, and that's what it looks like, and that's pretty good. So very simple. I'm going to go into sort of more details later, but that's the basics of my curvature. So once I've got that set, I now know I want a texture. So I go down to the bottom, and I can either click on this texture and pick from here, or as I prefer to do, because I can see bigger pictures, is I can go to my texture directory and drag and drop something from here onto it. So I want to break this up, you know, just in general. So let's just use a purlin. Let's use a 3D purlin here. So I'll drag and drop that into texture, and you'll see that absolutely nothing happens. So why is that? So if I slide up to the top, this is texture 1, or texture, so I need to increase the opacity. So with that done, it's now combining with my curvature map to give me an effect. It's not the effect I want, but it's giving me one. So then I open up the texture settings and I can change how this behaves. So it's currently on overlay, so I could take that out and put it to subtract, and now that's subtracting from my curvature map and giving me the effect I want. Okay, so that's the basic kind of workflow, and if I slide up a little bit to the top, this is coming a little bit dark for me. It's kind of faded, you know, with that blend. So what I could do is I could increase my balance, and that will bring some of the white back to do it. So that gives me a mask. I've now successfully combined two things together to create a mask. And if I actually come in here and pop a material on, let's go back to the material view. Whoops, that's not material, that's the base color. There we go. So let's pop a brass underneath. You see I've got brass and it's got a worn edge. I could, for example, pop brass on the top one, but increase my roughness, and now I've got a worn edged brass. Can even take some of the saturation out of the colour, and that would wear it even further. There we go. Okay, so that's a very basic example. Just the steps are, think about what you want, which map is just going to be your bottom one in the stack, set it to a normal blend, and then work your way up map by map to get there. So we're going to do a slightly more complicated one next, and hopefully I'm going to cover each of the effect maps as to what they do and what you can use them for. Okay, so I will talk to you then. Okay, so we're going to make a kind of mossy stone. I've just deleted all my layers so we can start again. I'm going to use like this concrete as a base because I've got nothing better to use at the moment. Just going to increase the tiling on this to give it a bit more fine detail. And then above this we'll add a layer, and for this layer I want to change how these layers work, so let's make it green, kind of an olivey-ish green, I guess. There we go. I don't want any height, so let's turn that off. I don't want any of those, all those, so just height and roughness. So I'm going to make it a bit shinier, so it's like a wet, you know, slimy kind of thing. And then we'll add in a black mask, and I'll add in a generator, and we'll pick our mask editor for the generator. There we go. Now you'll see there's an immediate change, and that is because our curvature is on and we don't want it. So the first question I asked myself is, where do I want this to be? Well, I want it to be towards the bottom of the stone, and I want it to be a little bit on the edges. So for that I'm going to need the position gradient to put it on the bottom, and I'll need the curvature to put it on the edges. So since the position gradient is first towards the bottom of the stack, I'm going to open that up and change the blending mode to normal. There we go. And then we of course need to turn the position gradient right up, and you'll see to start with that it goes onto the top of our stone, and I don't want it to, so I'm going to hit invert, and that will pop it towards the bottom. You can control this if you use the balance, the contrast, the brightness, and we've got our top to bottom influence here, so I can reduce those. This is inverted at the moment because we've inverted the map, so just be aware of that, it can get a bit confusing. Okay, so that's got it on the bottom. What else can we do? Well, we would probably want to pop this onto the curvature. So let's increase our curvature, and that's our initial effect. And if I open curvature up, this is all smearing out a little bit too much for my liking. So I'm going to switch this over to, I think, overlay. That's taking too much out, but not actually. No, I quite like that, because I want it to be on the bottom. I want it to be positional, so I'm using my position gradient to tell it what areas to put it into, and then I'm telling it to use the curvature to add to that. Okay, so we have control over the curvature as well, in that down here we've got our sharp, fine, soft, medium, large, big and huge details. So however these are dialed up is how much influence that feature is going to have. So best way for me to sort of demonstrate this is to take them all out, essentially. There we go. So for the huge features, I can put that in and I get a really broad, really kind of extensive feature there, and so I'm actually going to take that right down to nearly 0. So big is similar, but not as big as huge, of course. So let's take that down a bit, and then large, and then medium, somewhere around there I think, and then the softer. So this now seems to be kind of running out of steam a little bit. There we go, I think that's better. And then we have our fine features and our really sharp features. There we go. So depending upon what you want, you use these sliders to get the effect, and generally speaking you get like a horizontal curve going from bottom left to top right, but you don't have to stick to that. You can do what you want. You know, I could really jack it up, but bear in mind that the lower you go, the more you're going to obscure the finer and, you know, the medium, soft and fine details that are above it. We can also change how bright our map is. So you see, if I turn that right up, it becomes really bright, so you know it overwhelms everything. But you can make fine adjustments to, you know, to get where you want. There are other options here, but we'll cover those as we go. Okay, so let's take curvature down. So we've got 2 more steps: the texture 2 and the texture. And texture 2 we're going to use to break up our current map. So first of all, I'm going to choose a texture 2. So down in our image maps down here, I'm going to switch over to the textures, and I think perhaps we use this black and white spots. There we go. And to activate that, I need to come up and increase the texture to opacity. And of course, I can always I can come in here and change my blend mode to change how it works. So I don't want it to be an overlay, because that's only going to add to what's below it. I want it to be generally all over, and I want it to remove. So I'm going to go to subtract, and you might find that it subtracts altogether too much. So what we can do for that, so I'm going to switch over to the mask mode for this, or mask view. You'll see that's what our map looks like, and if I come to the bottom, we have we have some options here. So this is a procedural texture, and we have all its procedural controls underneath it. So I can change the balance, and I can change the contrast to get more of an effect, and I want it to be a bit more how can I put it, lumpy and focused. I don't want it to be all spread out. So let me just turn off that effect so you can see, or turn off, yeah. So this is our current mask, but with texture 2 this is how it looks, and you see it's really broken things up. So I want it to be a little bit more contrasty, perhaps break it up a little with the balance. Some of these you'll have more parameters on, like you may have a scale parameter for example, but if not, under texture 2 you do have a scaling option, so I can change the scale of this to, you know, fine tune my effect. I can also switch the projection type from triplanar, or from UV to triplanar. So triplanar is off to start with, but I could turn that on and it will project from, you know, around the model. I'm going to leave that as off. There's a triplanar contrast and a few other things in there that you can change. You can also invert it here if you wanted to. So you have lots of options, lots to check, and I would urge you to kind of explore and experiment, you know, because the more you do that, the more you'll kind of grasp what things do. Okay, so that's that one, and that's removed some of the detail from that map. If we go back to the material, it doesn't necessarily look like it's done a lot, but if I switch over to, whoops, it's the wrong one again, the base colour, you'll see it started to break things up at the bottom, and if I turn off the texture map there, you'll see what it started taking out. There we go. So okay, now for my last bit, I want the texture 1, or texture, and I want this to add in some spotty moss around all over the place. So I'll grab another texture, and this time I think I'll use one of the grunges, because I'm very fond of the grunges. Down here somewhere, there we go. And I'm going to use one that's quite contrasted, so it's got lots of black areas and some lighter areas. So I'll take this one and pop that in there, and of course nothing will happen until I turn the opacity up. You'll see that's had an effect, but not the one I want. So I'll go to my texture mode. I don't want an overlay, I want, say, a dodge add. No, I don't. I want, say, a multiply. No, I don't want that either. Well, let's do overlay won't do it. A screen. Okay, this is where I get stuck, and I have to go to the mask view to see what's going on. Because, yeah, the effects are quite subtle, and your eye doesn't always pick it up, especially for me when I'm looking at something else on the screen. So let's go through these and see what we've got. So that's dodge add. Actually, what I'm going to do first of all is turn it off, and now I can see what it's actually doing. You can see these lighter bits coming in, and it's actually doing what I want it to do. With dodge add, is just the map is not you know, the way I want it to be. So if I increase the scale of this map, that's going to do the job. There we go. This is one I might do on triplanar to get a distance, but that's messed my scale up, so I need to bring my scale down now. There we go. And let's have a look at the map. Let's have a look at the material. There, see, I've got these streaks going up, and you know, it's further broken up the the locations of this texture. I'm not sure I've got the right one in all honesty, but that's fine because I can just come in here and change out this input. So let's put a less contrasty one in and see what we get. There we go. And once again, if I want to see how it's doing, turn that off to remove it. Again, it's easy to see on the base color, and pop it back on. So I can see that it's coming in across the top. It's doing a little bit more of what I want it to do. I might change the scale a bit. There we go. I could increase the triplanar contrast, and let's see, I'm getting a few more stronger details coming in, and that's good. Okay, so let's go back to our material, and if I go to the rendered view, perhaps we'll get a nicer look if my PC doesn't give up and say it's too hot, John, I can't do it anymore. There we go. So there we have a kind of a mossy stone. It's not the best example I've ever done. I would use different materials, but I just wanted to show you the mask builder and its part in the whole. But it's pretty much worked out how I wanted. The moss is more to the bottom. It's broken up, and it's reasonably clean on top, but there are some patches coming up there. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. I'll do another example next, perhaps some sort of rusted metal or something. Okay, so I will talk to you then. Okay, so let's try and make a rusted metal here. I've deleted my layers, start again, and let's go to the materials, and I'll pick out a metal to start with. I don't want anything particularly bright and shiny, so let's go to iron hammered. Yes, there we go. Okay, so we've got our iron hammered, and we can adjust this as we want, of course. I want it to be a little rougher, because this is going to end up kind of corroded. It would be weird if it was perfectly shiny. And then above that, I'm going to add a new layer with a black mask and a generator in the black mask, and we'll set our mask editor. There we go. Last of all, so I can visualize it, I'm just going to set this layer, and I'm going to click, there's a rust down here somewhere, rust fine. There we go. Okay, so by default, that's how it's coming in. And if I go to my mask editor, it's coming in like that because the curvature is on. I do want to use curvature, so we're going to use that. But first of all, I think I might use something else. So what have we got? Thickness, that might be interesting. Possibly ambient occlusion. Let's use thickness. So if I turn the thickness on, my mask is going to reveal all the thickest areas on the mesh, and that's basically the distance between polygons, from one side of the mesh to the other. This is kind of not how I want it, because it's putting rust on the main, and I want it on more the edges, so, or the thinner parts in this case. So if I invert my map, I should get that on the thinner edges, and I can get it stronger or weaker depending upon how I set my brightness and contrast. Remember, I've got my invert on, so brightness is inverted, so this is really bright even though it's showing up everything, and this is really dark, so just be aware of that. Okay, so what else do I want to do? Well, I want to extend that into the occluded places. So the occluded places, where water, dust, dirt and things have all kind of accumulated. So if I go up, now no, I didn't set a blend mode here, it's because it's the bottom layer. So if I go up to my AO settings, which are up here somewhere, and turn that up. Nothing happens because my blend mode is needed to be changed, and we'll put that to add. Yep. So oddly enough, ambient occlusion works the other way around. It exposes the parts that are exposed to light and occludes the parts which aren't. So again, I'm going to need to invert that, and that's going to work on the inside. Let me change to my mask view and turn the AO off, and you'll see what's going on. So this is my thickness. If I turn my AO up, you can see the parts it's including in. Some of them are obscured in the model, so we can't see them very well. That's why switching to the mask view sometimes is helpful. We could try changing our blend type. Let's go max lighten, just to get the hang of what each of them does. I mean, I've been using them for years and I don't know. I have a rough idea, but I generally change between them to find the effect I want. Let's try multiply. No, that's not what I want. Add is fine. Okay, and we don't have really many options on the ambient occlusion, just blur, balance and contrast. So if I increase the contrast, because I've inverted it, it's going to remove things, and if I decrease the contrast, it's going to add in more. Again with the balance, there we go, a bit stronger there, that's good. Blur is quite handy. Depending upon the model you're working on, you may need to be cautious with it. If you have many seams, a blur could take the map away from the seam, and that can have some odd effects, but I think we should be right here. So let's blur that out. I think that's nice. There we go. Okay, so we're on add for that one, and yes, that's good. So let's go back to our material, and now I've got rust quite nicely where I would want it to be. Now again, I can add textures to this. I can do all sorts of things, but yeah, there's no but. We'll just use a texture. So let's have a texture 2. The texture is blank currently, so nothing's. It is having an effect because it's all one color. It's all either black or white, and the blend mode is having an effect on that. So let's come in here and pick a grungy one. Perhaps this grunge here. Pop that into texture 2, and now we can see the effect that's having without changing anything. It's a bit more messy, a bit more broken up, and a bit more smeary, which I quite like. Under our texture 2 settings, of course, we can invert. We can change the blend type. We can do all sorts of things to get the exact kind of effect you want. I think this was set to overlay, which I liked. There we go. And of course we can change the scale. You also have the contrast and brightness if you wish to use it, but this is coming in quite nicely now, I think. Rather than use the edge to get it on the edges, we've used thickness and ambient occlusion. The ambient occlusion is very nicely putting rust into these cutouts here, and our map is breaking it up nicely and doing it across the whole model, not just the areas where there is a little bit of rust. Okay, yeah, I'm liking that. Let's go and have a look at a kind of rendered view. It's not a kind of rendered view, it is a rendered view. Clicking the render camera up here, it's having a good think about it as my PC groans once more. And let's pop that into the preview angle camera to see what it looks like. That's pretty neat, quite like that. Okay, so I think we've done all the maps now, except micro heights, micro normal, but I think everything else I've covered. So the reason I've left those to last is because I have no height and I have no normal for this. Everything is kind of blank. So what I'm going to do is show you that next, using this as an example, because I've got some height information now with that pitted kind of iron. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so to use micro height and or micro normal, I need a layer below with height or normal. So I've tried it with the normal on this iron hammer. It doesn't display well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a paint layer in here. I'm going to paint something on here with some depth to demonstrate. So where's my basic hard brush? There it is. Let's pick an alpha. Anything will do, but yeah, something a bit vaguely interesting, I guess, once everything catches up with itself. Well, let's have this flowery thing. Okay, so let's make that bigger so that we can see, and I only want this in height. Okay, so I can stamp that on there, and apparently nothing will happen because I haven't increased height, because I'm an idiot. Actually, I want to decrease height in this case. There we go. So stamp that on, and now we have a little design on there. Now, to reference this information, I need to I need to add an anchor point to this. So if I add an anchor point, and I can give it a name, height info, then on my mask editor I can reference this. So at the very bottom, under your maps, you've got micro normal and micro height. I've got height here, so I'm going to click height, go to anchor points and select my height info, and then under the reference channel I want to look at height. There we go. Nothing will happen initially, but if I come up here, I have micro details, and I can turn on my micro height, and you can see that it incorporates immediately. So it's bringing in that height data and applying everything to it, which is very handy. And we have a few options here. I've got it on smooth, but we could have a standard and sobel and smooth, all different options. We can change our intensities. Curvature doesn't seem to be doing an awful lot, nor does height detail. The radius will have an effect, so it knows where there is an indent, and the radius will give me a blur around that essentially, and also depth. So if I take depth right down and then right up, we should see the difference. So right down nothing happens, and right up we get a maximum, and depending upon, you know, your combination here will depend upon what you get. There we go. So the micro normal works in much the same way, except you reference the normal channel and you turn on micro height. Now I've used a design here, but you could have some pits, you know, from a spot texture, or almost anything. As long as there's some height or normal data, you can usually get something. Unfortunately, the normal on the hammered iron isn't strong enough. It's not really giving me a clear result, which makes it not very good for demonstration purposes. Okay, so that's micro height. So I hope you found that in general useful. I know my examples aren't all that spectacular looking, but I hope that, you know, the general process gives you an idea of what's going on and how it works, and sometimes why things don't show up and sometimes why they do, and how to combine it all into one. Okay, so if you have any questions, please ask below. I hope you have a good day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, confession time, I missed a bit. I meant to show you how to save your work. So once you've got your mask all set up, if you go up to the mask and right click we should have create smart mask. So if I click on that, it will add it to my masks list down here. So it's going to call it new mask, which is annoying, but I should be able to right click and rename it. So if I rusted edges and occlusion, there we go. Press enter, that should do the job. Excuse me. Now I can't see it. Where is it? It is there. There we go. Rusted edges and occlusion, and I can use that anywhere I like and on any model, and all will be good. Might need tweaking on different models, depends upon the maps that are generated in them. But using the preview sphere to build your map is a good idea because it's got a lot of features that you can use. Okay, so for the second time, I hope you found that useful. Take care.